Hello, and welcome to the Agger Grand podcast, where we talk about farming, gardening, and all things regenerative. Today, we have RegenBen on our podcast, a very special guest. He is from the UK, he is a farmer. And before I go any further, I guess we also have Royce, obviously. But Ben, would you like to explain a little bit about what you do and who you are?
Okay, yeah. My name's Ben Taylor Davies. We're based in the UK. For those that know the UK a little bit, if you've got England, Scotland, Wales as part of the UK, we're sort of on the English Welsh border. Our nearest city would be Bristol, Bath, just an hour south of Birmingham. Most people know London, unfortunately, we're the other side of the country. So, yeah, we're farmers. I can talk in acres as well. Come on this podcast because normally it's all hectares and all metric. So we have about 540 acres on our farm, and really and truthfully, for an awful lot of years, we were following the more principle, where we just kept putting more and more products on and never seeing much more in terms of yield, certainly since about the mid-80s. And I'm sure we'll touch on it, but a big family tragedy and various other things unfortunately happened, and life changed very much for us. And funny enough, I did tour the US for 6.5 weeks and met some phenomenal people with some phenomenal ideas. Came back and started implementing them quite a lot on our farm, and then needed to for very other reasons. Yeah, we have what I'd consider. I don't even know what a full regenerative farm is or would look like. And I always think we're somewhere near there, and then you come up with another project and another idea and another solution to half your problems, and realize that where you thought you might have been. So we're on a very good journey, and I don't think that journey ever ends. Certainly in the life of where we are. So we grow. So we have a vineyard, which is getting more popular in the UK. My father actually planted it nearly 20 years ago, so a bit of a pioneer at the time. We grow asparagus, we grow potatoes, we grow wheat, we grow canola, or oilseed rape as we call it here. We grow fava bean. We have herbal lays. We of grassland then, but species rich grassland. We also grow barley, and a few other bits and pieces there. And then we have animals from ranging from cows, sheep, goats, pigs, chickens, ducks, geese, bees, alpacas. Don't think I've missed many of the animals out there. So that's a brief sort of introduction into us, and essentially how we farm and why we farm, is obviously the 5 principles of soil health, or 6 as you call them now over there, because you put in context as the sixth part of that. But actually, diversity for me is something that's far more key. Diverse, and I farm, and how we farm is diversity from an absolute nanoscale right the way up to a macro scale. Wherever we run diversity into our farm business, it seems to just pay over and over and over again.
Oh,
Awesome.
perfect. So Ben, we are wondering, you are a regenerative farmer. So for those listening who are not familiar, and I'm just kind of curious, how would you define a regenerative farm? Is it one type of farm? What does it kind of look like normally to you?
No, and interesting enough, I'm also a regenerative consultant, hence the RegenBen kind of tagline and strapline. And the really interesting thing about regenerative farming is there is no blueprint, which means as an advisor, you can't actually sit 10 people down in a classroom and give a lesson on regenerative farm, because every farm is very different and the options available to each farm is very different, and so it should be. So my simple definition of regenerative farm is replacing death with life. It sums up pretty much where we're at, in so much as wherever we manage to use what we call competitive exclusion. In other words, where we put more biology, more nature, more things living then funny enough, and that includes obviously diversity, but funny enough, wherever that occurs, the incidence of pest disease and weeds massively reduces. Of course, what we've done over the past is actually fight nature with death wherever we possibly can for control. And all that's done essentially is allow biology to mutate. You end up with resistance to the very things you're trying to kill. And in actual fact, you get further and further down a thin edge of a wedge of being this moron, where you spend more and more and more on the very things that you used to spend very little on. It's the name of the title of my book, in actual fact, that I'm writing at the moment. It's called Moron, and how to get off this absolute addiction to just putting more and more and more products on. So yes, in simple definition, we've replaced death with life. Death with life.
Do you think that you could have too much biological activity and too much diversity on a farmland that would actually cause a negative impact on your soil or growing environment?
Wow. It's a job to measure too much, I think, is the biggest problem, is how do you measure too much? I think the most essential part of any farm business and for any business for that matter is profitability, of course. So if you're seeing the detrimental part of what you're doing is causing a negative effect on the very profitability of what you're doing, then that's a problem. The beauty of diversity and the beauty of more and more biology, what you find is the solutions are obviously part of the package of your farm. Hence the reason we have goats that are very, very useful at chewing down chicory stems, which are fairly unpalatable to most other animals. The pigs are able to root out various bits and pieces that become problematic, rhizomas, weeds and things like that. So the pigs are introduced there. And so in actual fact, as long as you have a healthy, living, thriving ecosystem as part of your farm, and that definitely includes management of animals and animals being an integral part of your farm, not just on the grassland, but actually massively important part of your whole rotation, arable as well. I don't think you can have too much biology and too much diversity, no. Awesome. Haven't got there yet, let's put it that way. I'll let you know if I do.
Sounds good. So how would you how do you maintain profitability through regeneration? Like, do you find it easier to maintain profitability versus like when because you said that you had a past of not so regenerative practices? Was it easier in the short term to make money pre-regen, or in the longer term you make more money, or like how does that work for you?
Yeah, so in actual fact, I mean, being a moron and getting a bigger moron, should I say, in actual fact, farm debt was rising year on year. It got to the stage, I don't even understand bushels and acres, so I can't even talk about yields, unfortunately, because the rest of the world talking tons an acre, and you're all bushels. So I apologise for that. But our bushels an acre equivalents then never seem to increase in the 80s. Yet the cost of production, the cost of tractors, fuel, the cost of pesticides, fertilizers, everything we were doing not only was going up with inflation, but was also going up because as our soils were degraded, they were needing more and more support in terms of artificials to plug the gap. So that was a big problem. The other thing I think is really essential to understand is when I go back to my grandfather's generation, every farmer had 10 cows, 5 pigs, 30 sheep, and so forth, and spread the risk. And generally, and that's where the phrase came, and I'm pretty sure it's an American phrase, up horn, down corn, and vice versa. That if you've got a good price on one thing, then it more than offset the bad price of something else. Then, of course, my father's generation, and I think this is worldwide as well, everyone was told to specialize. If you specialize, you become a professional at what you're doing, and you de-risk because you've become a very, very good wheat grower, for instance, and therefore, in actual fact, if you focus all your energies on wheat growing, then in actual fact, you become this amazing wheat grower. That was the biggest problem. I think there was no greater risk than actually just becoming a monoculture, mono-farm. And essentially what we've done is go back to what my grandfather's generation was doing, and that is diversity. If we've got goats being sold in June and pigs being sold in April and wheat being sold in November, and I've always got something to sell. And funnily enough, the byproducts of, say, wheat growing, for instance, are keeping my sheep and my pigs alive. So the recycling, I end up with far less waste. You know, if you're a wheat grower, you come on the straw and you chop the straw and the straw goes down, and then you wait till you plant it again. Whereas now, of course, we're putting cover crops in. These cover crops are being grazed. The byproduct of the soil health and the increased soil health is feeding an animal, and the animal turns into meat, and the meat is saleable. So in actual fact, in terms of profitability, it's ever rising. And then on the back of diversity, and when you realize that's so important, you start opening little farm businesses. So we have a little farm shop on our farm. We have a brewery making beers and vodkas and gins and cider. We have a fermentary making kefir water, where we ferment the fruit juice, the waste fruit, or the fruit that doesn't meet spec. And all of a sudden you have more diversity on the farm. And we do agritourism as well with a glamping business. Because funny enough, the general public, when you start engaging with them quite a lot, actually really are interested in where their food comes from and how it's produced. Going back to your original question, profitability is let's put it this way: I'm paying more tax every year.
In a good way.
Yeah.
It really sounds like the farm is super diverse, not only in like the types of things that you're growing there, but also in the different business opportunities there too. That sounds very exciting, and I would definitely love to visit if I ever come across the pond, as they say. It sounds like a great place to visit. I have a follow-up question. I had no idea that you had a vineyard there on the farm also.
Okay.
And I am really interested in how you do cover crops in the vineyard. And do you let the animals in? And if you do let the animals in there, do you have to train the vines a special way?
Okay. So interesting enough, our vineyard is called the Hands-Off Vineyard. That's how we market our brand. And that's because it's really interesting. Another thing to understand on our farm, it's only myself, my wife, and my two daughters when they're not at school, and my son, who I haven't touched on, who unfortunately suffered a huge brain injury. But he comes out on the farm and certainly enjoys the farm. So we don't employ anybody either. So you can imagine we're rather quite busy people, as I spend most of my time as a consultant as well. So what I'm trying to tell you is Helen is rather quite busy, my wife. And what we realised is we hadn't got time to prune and mow and do everything in this vineyard that I see everybody spending weeks and weeks and weeks tending to these vines. We essentially we don't actually grow cover crops in the vineyard. We grow grass, native grasses and herbs and forbs and flowers between the rows. So it's more permanent row crops or grassland between. And then for 3 days a month, we let the sheep in. And the sheep graze the grass. They do all of the pruning of the runners and the things you don't particularly want below a certain height. They can't quite reach, and this is purely by fluke. This was not designed by my father when he built the vineyard, but he happened to just build it at a height which is about 5'6" off the ground. So the sheep themselves can't actually reach the really important parts of the vineyard, and they mooch around in the bottom and chew off all the grasses and do all that sort of thing. And essentially all we do is what we call two human interventions a year. So in January or February we will prune once, and then in October we pick. And other than that, the sheep do everything else for us. It has no sprays, it has nothing, it has no nutrition. It has absolutely zero interference. It's not huge. I mean, we're back to acres, aren't we? So it's an acre and a half, nearly 2 acre and 3/4. But this year it produced just over 9,500 bottles of sparkling pet net wine. So it was a good year, and it comes with a great story. And funny enough, it really helps with the marketing when you've got something very, very different than the bog standard wines that everybody seems to be producing.
Mm. Do you add any
Sounds
like
great.
additives to it, to the soil or anything? Nothing. So completely hands off.
Total hands off. It's 22 years of symbiosis with the soil, with the environment, with everything. Um, you could almost call it neglected, but it just seems to thrive. And I think the reason it thrives is because we literally have done nothing since the day it went in, and yeah, we obviously suffer from frosts and things like that in the UK. So the year before we had a terrible April and May frosts, and we only produced 1,000 bottles. And fortunately for us, and this is why diversity is so important. If the vineyard's not making a huge amount of money, well, thankfully it's only an acre and 3/4 of the farm.
Mm.
Let's hope we have a good agritourism year, or a great year in the shop, or the fermentary, or the brewery, or wheat, or cow. It's just you don't get upset so much. It's not stress-free farming, but it's certainly getting there
Right. It takes
because
it off, alleviates a little bit of that stress.
massive.
Mm.
Massive. I see people that own just a vineyard, and they I think a lot of it is they're applying products and doing things because they just can't afford not to in their minds that if I'm doing something, it must be helpful. And sometimes I think it's far more helpful if us as humans just let nature get on with what it was designed to do.
Mm.
Hmm. Ben, what emotions do you think are preventing farmers and growers generally from going regenerative and starting to adopt these kind of practices? Do you think it's fear? Do you think
Yeah, definitely. And let's be honest. I mean, it's the frog in the boiling water analogy a little bit as well. I think I think this moron that I keep talking about. It really is. My father started with a very small amount of fertilizer and a very small amount of pesticide, and it transformed everything he did. And then the following year, you can do a little bit more. And then, like I said, resistance comes in, so you have to do more and more and more. And before you know it, you are really absolutely tied into a quite a frightening thing, in so much as the cost of growing these things just about pays. You just about pay with the yield you get, and it's that circular. Right, I get my money from growing my crops. I can pay all my fertilizer bills and my chemical bills and every other bills, and machinery and diesel and all of that sort of thing. And it's that safety factor, isn't it? It's you insulate yourself because that's how you do it. And all of a sudden, someone's standing up and saying, "Well, to be honest, you really need to jump off the treadmill. Have you ever considered what on earth you're doing?" And like you say, fear is a massive player
Mm.
of doing that. But fortunately, last year in particular, when the fertilizer prices in the UK went to £1,000 for a ton of nitrogen, that was brilliant, because in actual fact people were like, well, I can't afford it, so what are the options? And as a consultant, I really thought I was going to be spending 3 days as a consultant and 4 days on the farm. That was my whole little plan, and I'm spending at least 6 days as a consultant. Because people, certainly in the UK, but worldwide, I work in Africa, I work in Portugal, I work in quite a lot of Europe, Estonia, and places like that, all up through the Baltics, France as well. More and more people are emailing me on a daily basis saying, "Where do I start? How do I go? Really want to get off this treadmill."
Mm.
So
So
Yeah.
I kind of want to take a step back a little bit and kind of go through your journey of like how you even started here and how you got here. So like I heard that you said that your dad, he was a farmer. Is that how you kind of got into this business?
Okay. How long? Hopefully you got a bit because
We
our
are here
story is a
all
little bit.
night.
Yeah. Okay. So my story is obviously it's everybody has a story, and ours is full of full of all sorts. So I'll talk my story through. Okay. Okay. So yeah, born on a family farm, the farm we're now farming. Believe it or not, my father encouraged me not to farm. He said that it was a bad profession, and at the time, if you think about 80s and 90s, I'm not sure what it was like in the US, but the prices of wheat were £65 a ton, and it was costing £85 a ton to grow them. Why on earth
Mm.
would encourage somebody to get into farming? It was dire. Um, I used to work on the farm whenever I possibly could in school holidays and that sort of thing. But generally, you know, he was really you don't want this life. So I went to university in the end, and I studied geography and paleontology, and loved that and that sort of thing. Fully expecting at the end of university to come back and run the farm because you know you just think this is what's going to happen. And my father said, number one, it won't support two families. It certainly won't support him and myself and the future of my family. So he said, you know, you're going to have to go and get a job. So I applied for some jobs and ended up becoming an agronomist. So you know, at the time, advising agrochemical, fertilizer, seed, and that sort of thing. Paid very little attention to soil. I'll be honest. Soil was the medium in which you grew things. Soil was there to supply nutrients to a plant. End of really. Um, and really for best part of 16, 17 years, just was an agronomist. Really enjoyed what I did. It got a bit boring, a bit monotonous because, of course, it was all recipe based, really, and just reached for that packet and that can every time, anytime we saw a problem. Then obviously I married my wife in 2003, and I had my daughter Tegan, eldest daughter Erin in 2007, and then my son Job in 2011. And then in 2012, my son managed to wriggle himself out of a car seat and walk across a very small paddock, and a horse was there grazing and kicked out and basically kicked him in the side of the head. Mm. Totally destroying his brain, really, to the point where when we got airlifted to hospital, he was given a 5% chance of survival. And he was put in intensive care in a coma. And there he lay, where they basically turned his brain off with medicine and cooled his brain down to try and stop swelling. And for the next 8 months, we essentially spent an awful lot of time praying that he lived, kissing him goodbye, because we were told many times that he wasn't going to make it through the night. And yeah, had all of that to deal with, which was fairly horrific. And came out. Fortunately, Job is alive, so he's with us. He is severely brain damaged, but he's doing all right, and he's a great kid. Having said that, 2013, 14, and 15, for me, I couldn't come to terms with what I just lived through. I ended up with severe depression, severe mental health problems, and when I say severe, just awful. I can't even put my finger on whether that was the acceptance of having a disabled child, because obviously you've got your life kind of planned out. You know, oh, you know, knowing, you know, in the UK, taking your son on his 18th birthday for his first legal pint of beer is quite a big thing in the UK, you know, that sort of thing, and watching him play rugby and sports and that sort of thing, and that was never going to happen, and I couldn't get that out of my head, and it was a dire thing. And and I was rather quite. And the worst thing about mental health is you take it out on those nearest and dearest. And poor Helen, my wife, put her through hell. And essentially what happened is, I bubbled along terrible, hated my job, I struggled to leave because I felt I needed to be at home protecting your family, didn't want another member to get hurt. It was dire. And eventually Helen sat me down and said, listen, you've lost your love for agronomy and agriculture, you've lost your love for your own life, you've lost your love for most things. We're all right, and Job's okay. He's on a journey, and he's on a different journey. So what we're going to need to do is actually get you well, and how we're going to do it. And she encouraged me to apply for a thing in the UK, and it is worldwide as well. Those in the US can apply for a Nuffield scholarship, and it's a scholarship that's awarded to people working in the food industry in the UK, but around the world as well, to travel the world and learn about processes from around the world, and then bring them back to the UK and implement them either in their own farm businesses, but also help UK industry or wherever you're from. So I applied for this scholarship, and I didn't particularly want it, and I was awarded it, and that was quite gutting for me, because I knew then I was going to have to travel the world on my own and leave my family. And my first trip was to the US. I bought basically a one-way ticket. Well, it wasn't. It was a six-week ticket. I flew to Minot in North Dakota. And I was going to leave from Houston in Texas 6 weeks later. And I remember getting in the airport and basically sat in this hire car that I'd got, and decided that I was at a crossroads in life, and it was either you mope around for 6 weeks wishing you were at home, or you make the most of this opportunity that's given to you. And it just so happens I met some amazing people, Gabe Brown being one of them, very early doors, but lots of people that you never hear about on these channels, that are just doing some fantastic things. And that spurred me on, and I ended up spending 21 weeks traveling the whole world. Wow. I went from anywhere from China to Mongolia to Peru to Australia to Poland to Ukraine. You name it, I pretty much traveled the four corners of the earth, and started on this. Came back, and I learned so much, and started implementing a little bit more on the farm, and using these processes. But then, more importantly, we realised that Job, my son, was going to need some serious care for the rest of his life, when me and Helen probably wouldn't cope. And we're covered by insurance, and we decided to essentially sue ourselves for what we have. I don't know whether you have public liability insurance in the US. I don't know how it quite works, but essentially, if somebody gets injured on your farm, you're covered for that. The biggest problem was we were covered for 10 million, but the claim came in at 17.5 million. So it left me and Helen liable for 7.5 million, which meant potentially we would lose the farm. And obviously the bank got to hear about the fact that we could be losing 7.5 million. They decided that perhaps our overdraft was a little bit too big, and they got a little bit concerned about how things were going. And so essentially they kind of forced the on us, really, that we had to farm for free. Well, funny enough, that's probably the best thing that ever happened, because all of a sudden, this is where there's regenerative journey, because you'd seen these people, met these people. It was like, right, okay then, guys, got a little problem. I've got a farm for free, or essentially for free. I've got to pay an overdraft off rather quite quickly, so anything that comes in is probably not going to be recycled back to me. And set about this journey that has paid off our debts. And has led to profitability and all of these sort of things. More importantly, what it's led to is mental health. Whether you call it cured, I think I'm cured. And I'll tell you why I think I'm cured. I think farmers are unique. We're a unique breed. In the UK, and I'm not sure across the US, but historically, we have quite a high level of dyslexia, but also all the other ADHDs and various other spectrum. And the reason for that is historically, if a farmer had 6 sons and 5 sons were fine, and the other son had dyslexia, the 5 sons went to the city and earned a living, and the son that had the dyslexia stayed at home and farmed. So it's that natural selection, really, of that. Now, I'm highly dyslexic and also got ADHD, and I'm sure I've got all other kinds of problems that are undiagnosed. But one thing I know I'm good at is problem solving. Mm. But what happens is, unfortunately, what happens on the moron approach is you follow recipes. You're giving a recipe of sprays, you're giving a recipe of fertilizer, you're giving a recipe of seeding, you're giving a recipe of even veterinary medicine. You do no problem solving. So your mental state, unfortunately, starts thinking about all the other things, because if you don't need to come up with solutions because they're all packets and cans and bottles, then unfortunately you start dwelling on some of the other things, your farm debt, and who knows what you might. But I firmly believe it's a massive problem. And what's happened in my life is all of a sudden now I look at a problem. Can I solve it with an animal? Can I solve it with people? Can I solve it with a plant? Can I solve it? My goodness, all of a sudden my brain is active, it's working, it's challenging, it's doing all the exciting things that my brain was designed to do, coming up with solutions that aren't bottles and cans, that are just phenomenal. And the endorphins it releases in myself when you come up with that, oh, I know, we've got this invasive weed, we're going to take the goats and pigs and get rid of it. And then it disappears, and everyone's like, how have you done that? And it's like, well, and they're like, it's amazing. And you think, not really. I've just fortunately used the brain I was very much blessed with. So that's probably a 15-minute talk about through my mental health, through our journey, through everything. But I just thought, that's how we've ended up where we are now.
Thank you for being so honest about your whole life story. I think people can really benefit from hearing things like that. And it sounds like you and Gabe Brown is someone that you had mentioned before. It sounds like both you and Gabe Brown came from kind of a place of desperation when you first started out doing regenerative agriculture. And I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
A lot of people might wonder, how do you and Gabe Brown and other people like that get along without any fertilizers, without any herbicides? I think like the most common question from U.S. farmers and gardeners might be, where do plants get their nutrients from? Like, don't you need to apply it because you're taking the grain off the farm, you're taking the fruit off year after year, and it is taking things with it. So what do you think is wrong with that idea? And how do you and Gabe Brown and people like that manage to get along and keep pulling the plants off?
I think the biggest problem is I think people just imagine soils as a pot and or a bank account essentially, and that you can only take out what you put in. Unfortunately, it's so tragically sad that that's how we believe everything happens, and therefore, to think in a different dimension about soils and how soils work is rather quite problematic. Things. I could talk about every nutrient, but I'll use nitrogen as an example of how nitrogen is really quite a simple thing to put into your plants if you can actually just consider how things work. I think the easiest thing to understand is a healthy soil will allow this to work. And the reason a healthy and how a healthy soil works is very simple. You have a plant growing in your soil. The plant is basically a carbohydrate factory. It uses three free things, and I often talk about how farming really should be free. You know, you take sunlight. Last time I looked, that was free. You take precipitation, and that's generally free. And you take CO2, of which there's certainly enough in the atmosphere, and that's free. And you put it through a plant, then through your catalyst, or the thing you own, your asset, or soil. And funny enough, you make money. It worries me that many people have got so far removed from the very simple basic of that they're actually going bust purely on the fact that they can't get back to the three free things. So
which is ironic.
It's incredible. It's incredible, and I say it's an incredible business model, isn't it? You take three free things, you put it through your asset, and you make money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if nobody learns anything else today, then for me, I think a lot of people just need to keep readdressing what they're doing and how and why they're doing it. That's a really important thing, because everybody will sell you, and everybody bolts on to this business model, selling you stuff to make you more money. But they going on holiday, you know, and what I notice, you know, I'm digressing a little bit, but what you notice is all these salesmen go on holidays and have wonderful little lives purely on the back of what you're making for them. Mm. Yeah. I got a bit sick and tired of watching farmers going on holiday in the UK, and whilst all the advisors going on holiday all around the world. Yeah. It says an awful lot. But anyway, going back to these healthy soils. So these carbohydrate factories are phenomenal. And every evening you have what we call drawdown in terms of all this carbon-rich amino acids are pumped into the soil. And that's really important, because that, of course, is feeding all these wonderful microbes in our soil, this living, breathing thing. And these microbes, in turn, forage and gather nutrients from the soil and provide it back to the plant. So it's a wonderful symbiotic relationship that has developed over 500 million years that we seem to have tried to interfere with in the last 120. I think evolution probably trumps what we're doing. So that's a wonderful thing. But more interestingly, these microbes are living, breathing, and funny enough, they're breathing in oxygen and expiring CO2. The soil is starting to fill up with CO2. Of course, nature doesn't waste anything, so this CO2 mixes with all the water in your soil, and it forms carbonic acid. And carbonic acid is phenomenal at stripping out potassium and phosphate and other elements and making them far more available from this whole huge bank that is in your soil. But of course, they keep respiring, and that becomes problematic because they poison themselves if they kept respiring CO2. So, of course, the moon has a massive influence on our soils because twice a day it affects our tides, and I think we're pretty. I know in America a lot of you think the world's flat these days, but believe me, I'm pretty sure it's still there. So we'll take that as a given on this podcast. And hopefully we also believe that the moon has a huge effect on water movement and tides. It does on our soil too. It pulls water up twice a day, and that's really important in a healthy soil, because if you've got a compacted layer, it won't. And as it does that, of course, it pulls water up and expires your carbon dioxide out of your soil surface. It squeezes up, pushing the CO2 out of your soil surface. And that's rather quite important, because actually that's your soil exhaling. Of course, I go back to 500 million years of evolution of plants. Stomata on the underside of every leaf. There's a reason for that. Clever, isn't it?
Wow.
6 times more CO2. 6 times more CO2 comes out of a healthy soil surface than in the atmosphere. Efficiency. What a wonderful efficiency that is.
Wow. So
stomata captures this amazing, respiring, healthy soil. Then the moon disappears, as it does. Twice, has that influence. And of course, the soil inhales. It inhales 78% nitrogen. There's a reason for that. And 21% oxygen. There's a reason for that too. 21% oxygen is just enough oxygen to keep those microbes totally and utterly working as hard as they possibly can. 78% of that air that falls into the soil is nitrogen. And we are blessed with so much biology that converts that N2 very, very tricky into plant available nitrogen that gives it to a plant, back to exactly what I talked about at the very start, the symbiotic relationship between the carbohydrates being fed to these microbes and the microbes performing this nitrogen. So that is a very simple explanation, and hopefully that kind of explains how, as soon as you've got a soil that works and functions, not only have you got it full of biology, you've got it breathing, and you've got it taking in 78% nitrogen, huge amount of nitrogen twice a day, that funny enough is there to feed your plant.
Wow. Ben, I am just floored by this. I had never imagined that like tides would happen in like the soil water and things would be moving up and down. That had never occurred to me, and I was riveted to the screen as you were describing this. It's so interesting to think that there's like a microbial system that works off of that too. It's just super, yeah, just nuts. Mind is blown.
And I love how you start with like the three free elements: the sun, precipitation. Oh no, how do I forget the third one?
CO2.
And then CO2.
CO2.
Right. And I mean, just thinking that way is like amazing in itself, because it's almost like a growth mindset of like, I have these things that are already here. I can do amazing things with these abundant resources that you can access anywhere on the planet. And I really think that's a great way. I kind of want to dip back a little bit to when you were talking about problem solving, and I want to ask, like, what makes what makes a good farmer? Like, what makes you a good problem solver on the farm? Because I imagine that you're talking about like how like you add in all these different elements and like, oh wow, I feel so smart because it ended up working out. But I imagine most times it probably doesn't work out. Like, you probably fail more times than than not, right?
And more often than not, the times we make mistakes are often the times that it turns into a success. And more often than not, when you say something fails, it generally fails in what you designed, but in actual fact, it succeeds in something you never expects. It expects it to succeed in, if you see what I mean. So often there is like, and when you look back, you think, well, yeah, that was obvious. But at the time, you think that you're one-dimensional, and farmers are far too one-dimensional. If much like I need to add fertilizer, because at the end of the day, it's a bank, and therefore, I've got this, and I need to add that to get that. And you think, yeah, no, that's a problem. I've forgotten the question. Something about farmers and
what makes a good problem solver for a farmer?
What makes a good problem solver? What makes a good problem solver is probably, and this is going to probably irritate quite a few people, stop taking advice. Actually start using the very thing you're blessed with, and the very thing that the reason you were a farmer in the first place, which was, in actual fact, solutions. Problem solve. We're all blessed with an amazing brain. They are just unbelievable. They are unbelievable. And what is so exciting is the day you decide that I'm sick and tired of reaching for that packet and that sticky plaster. Why am I continuously applying lime every 2 or 3 years? My pH just keeps going, keeps dropping. There's a reason why it's dropping. Let's solve that problem rather than let's stop sticking sticky plasters. So for me, a good farmer is one that actually takes correct advice to really reassure your own thought process. There's a chapter in my book, and it's called "Who Owns Your Farm?" Because believe you me, there's the amount of people that ring an agronomist or a land agent continuously to do, shall I do this? And you think, well, that's a ridiculous question. Why? Well, yes, but why are you asking me? So for me, I think farmers need to take back control. That's you are the landowner, and really just take back the responsibility, and it becomes far more fun, far more interesting, and the results are far more exciting.
Do you find that farmers have a responsibility to not only their land but also to the land around them?
Sorry, in what context? In
So
neighbouring farms?
yeah, I guess like for instance, I remember you listening to you and you're talking about how there's a river by you, I guess that has a phosphate problem. Um and so I was wondering like as a farmer who cares about his community and the health of his soil, do you take a responsibility of trying to fix that problem even though it isn't technically like on like your land and like
Yep, hugely. Hugely. If nothing more, to lead by example. One thing farmers hate is being dragged kicking and screaming and told how to farm. So what one thing we've done here is you know seven or 8 years ago now. I was the madman of Ross on Y. What on earth is he doing? Cover crops and doing all this stuff and oh, it'll never work and that sort of thing. And then gradually over a bit of time, you get people just picking up the phone, dropping in for a cup of coffee. Any chance you can just explain? I've just looked at, I've been watching over the hedge of what you're doing and that sort of thing. And my neighbours are now all direct drilling and doing that sort of thing that never thought I'd see the day. Certainly on two of them. So for me, it's a little bit showing, showing some. And I think there's a lot of looking over the hedge and the fear of being ridiculed by neighbours is a massive problem in agricultural communities. So it's quite nice to stick your head well above the parapet and show people that it can be done. Not necessarily boast and not necessarily talk about it too much and that sort of thing, but just carry on. People will notice. There is no two ways about it, and that sort of thing. There is a huge responsibility on us for phosphate in our river catchment. It's horrific, only because nobody understands the movement of phosphate in soils in our catchment, and it's moving very, very fast. Despite the fact that the scientists have always told us that phosphate doesn't move in the soils. If you don't have any calcium to bind it, it really does move rather quite quickly. So on a more personal scale, I do quite a lot of lobbying to politicians and things to explain to them the problem and actually show them some solutions. And I do quite a lot of talks. I get invited for the Friends of the River Wire, the lower and various things, and before you know it, you have this groundswell of people asking questions and yeah, reaching out to the community and the community really being my sounding board and talking and I think we do a lot of farm tours here, and if you have 10 people turn up and you talk about phosphates in the River Wye, and they go and talk to 10 more people about this farmer that's doing this stuff and hasn't applied phosphate and doesn't need to, and in actual fact plants cover crops down by the river to capture all this free phosphate that keeps coming down the river was bound to soil. So I go fishing for everybody else's soil and phosphate. Then, funny enough, those 10 people, then, and it is exponential growth of people talking about this stuff.
So I guess for the audience now, can you describe exactly the problem you're having with the river and the phosphate leaching out?
Yeah, a couple of problems really. It's quite ironic that from an animal welfare point of view, in the headwaters of our catchment, but from an animal welfare, everybody's asked for free range eggs. So what was barn-contained chickens are now free to roam stalls that are not designed to carry the loading of manure that comes out the back end of a chicken. Bearing in mind, 4 chickens produce the same waste as 1 human. We have something like 25 million chickens in our catchment. Which is an enormous amount of people. So first and foremost, we have the very double whammy of the public asking for animal welfare and free range eggs, and actually polluting their own river, because in actual fact we can't capture the manure that goes on the ground. Then is very hard to do anything with. The other massive double whammy besides that is our soil is massively lacking calcium. We're a magnesium dominated soil, and if you ever look at phosphate and the way phosphate binds to calcium, it makes it fairly an immovable object, which is why we're always told in universities and colleges and things like that phosphate barely moves. What is it, 2 inches in 50 years? And that's absolutely correct if you've got plenty of calcium to bind to it. But when you have an excess of phosphate and very little calcium, and we're talking about total calcium in our soils of 2,000 pounds an acre, whereas we've got magnesium of about 25,000 pounds an acre. So we've got a very difficult soil. Then in actual fact, it becomes highly leachable when the soils are. But the trouble with having a magnesium-dominated soil is magnesium, I'm sure you're aware, squeezes the soil together and makes it go like concrete. So in the summer, you have a very, very tight soil with all this phosphate loading applied to the top of it. And then you go and get an inch of rain, and of course it just washes over the top of the soil straight into the river catchment. So it becomes a huge problem further up the catchment. And then what happens is, of course, those that are still barn and the manure they can gather is just actually, because obviously the cost of transport is then delivered to other farms down the catchment to apply. We all need this nitrogen. And let's be honest, we know very few people who admit to needing the phosphate, but it's cheap nitrogen because it's chicken muck. So we'll keep plastering it on as the amount of phosphate is saturated in our soils. And then, of course, that becomes a problem. And then we grow. We're renowned in this catchment as well for growing. What do you call it? We call it maize here. It's forage corn, I think you call it. Is it forage corn? Yeah. Forage corn and potatoes. And the topography is quite undulating, so we're not on flat fields. So you can imagine, and our forage corn is basically harvested in October, quite late, almost impossible to get a cover crop in after it. Left bare soils on slopes, you can imagine high rainfall. Sees huge amounts of soil washing into the catchment. So yeah, that's pretty much the problem. So what we're doing here is trying to show people that if you get the rhizophagy cycle working in your soils, funny enough, your soils are saturated in phosphate. You can extract with biology plenty of plant available phosphate by using cover crops, by catch crops, by companions, by all sorts of things in the rotation and cycling this phosphate. And also, as I said, growing cover crops down by the river. So when the river floods, we have. It was really interesting. Again, this is problem solving, isn't it? But this is my wife's problem solving, and this is why it's so useful to have something to bounce a few ideas off. We have a fence down by the river, a fence my father put up, and you can only see the very top foot of the fence now, because over the years it's captured all the silt going down the river, and it keeps building up around this fence, and therefore 4 foot's in the ground. And I explained to Helen how I was going to set up all these fences across the fields during the winter months to capture the soil, and came up with this elaborate plan of trapping all this soil. And she just pointed out, wouldn't a plant do the same thing? So if you grew a mustard, surely that would actually capture all of this. So she kind of put me straight back in my box, and I thought, yeah, that's a very simple solution. So yeah, we go fishing for people.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you are harvesting soil basically that comes to you freely.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, it's as I said about the three things, and you put those three things through your assets. You must be bonkers as a farmer if you're happy to see your asset going down, literally down the drain.
Mm-hmm. So I have been waiting, Ben, to talk to you about this. You had Rob knows exactly what I'm going to talk about because I don't get to talk to people about this very often. But you had been speaking about this, I believe, on John Kemp's podcast. Gerald Pollack at the University of Washington, he has his theory about exclusion zone water and how it might work in biological systems. And just for the audience, maybe we should kind of describe it a little bit. And I want to know what you think about exclusion zone water and its role in plant physiology. So
Wow,
maybe
that's a massive question. Where to start? I think the easiest thing to describe is the very fact that osmosis cannot be explained by the way water can get to the top of most trees due to the gravitational pull of the earth. Therefore, and it's not just trees, but it's most plants as well, and therefore there has to be something that we don't know or don't understand very well of how water moves within plants. Now, I'll just go back a little bit about water. And water was something I decided to do I was going to do a basic fact sheet for my clients about water because I thought, well, at the end of the day, it's really quite an important thing in everything we do, including if we're making compost teas and that sort of thing, and expected to write a one-page fact sheet on water. And when I got to page number 37 that I was writing, I realized that this stuff was probably the most complex things anybody had ever heard of. And in actual fact, we needed we need to spend far more time understanding water, and in actual fact, structuring of water for compost teas, I think, is the missing ingredient that very few people talk about. That's beside of easy water, but are you familiar with structured water and flow forms?
yeah, so maybe we should talk about it a little bit for the audience. Whenever Gerald Pollack talks about it, he had noticed in the lab that right next to hydrophilic surfaces, that water seems to form a layer. So water is H2O, but it
Yeah.
seems to kind of buck off hydrogens, and it just forms a hydrogen-oxygen kind of lattice, almost like a crystalline kind of thing. And the water actually pushes stuff around in the water. So Gerald Pollack noticed that these little microspheres in the water were kind of being funneled along that hydrophilic surface, and they would measure the pH of that water right next to it. The pH was very low because it had extra hydrogens. And so this water that they eventually found was powered by infrared light. I think it's 270 nanometer light. And it has the ability to move things. And so Gerald Pollack discusses how this might happen in the human body. And he says that the human heart can't possibly be responsible for moving all the blood throughout all the different veins in our body. And there has to be another mechanism that's kind of helping things along. And it's probably this exclusion zone water. I feel like a lot of people think he's kind of off the wall, but the guy, has a lab that he, studies these hydrophilic surfaces, and it just so happens that the cell walls of bacteria and a bunch of other stuff in our own bodies, all of these are hydrophilic surfaces, all the different, gels that exist in, in plants and in humans. And it's a really interesting theory, and I think it should be studied way more than it is now. It's extremely interesting to me. And I'm interested to know how you kind of use the structured water concept, and I'm sure it has kind of entered your mind as you're farming, Ben. How can I get this structured water to work better for me?
Yeah. So what we're trying to do is actually structure water and understand how water works to allow it. There's so much more energy in water. As water falls to the earth in terms of precipitation, gathering protons. I think the other thing to touch on is the browning motion of water. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but you turn on a high-powered microscope and all of a sudden you see all more water. The browning motion of water, essentially, all this water that becomes totally energized, and what we need to understand is how important any energy is. It's the same as the EC scale as well, and how sheep manure is actually full, or animal manure is full of electrons as well, and how actually when we start talking about electricity and energies, how actually the massive importance of all this plays. So in terms of structuring water, we're playing around with a few devices at the moment to actually see if we can actually structure water so that when we apply it to the soil and apply it to plants, it becomes holds far more oxygen. It becomes far easier to actually transport within the leaf, and like you say, get movement is something that we're massively important of getting these easy water to get into the pathways into the leaf and into the soil, so that in actual fact, rather than dumping what is this essential bank of water that we believe is so, it's just water is not water is water. What we need to do is understand that it's so much different. So like I said, we're currently playing with devices to see if we can actually massively increase the uptake. I have 4 devices, 2 from the US, 1 from Switzerland, and 1 from Ukraine before all the nasties kicked off, and seeing if we can actually structure some water with our compost extracts and compost teas to increase the efficiency and efficacy of uptake, but B, also the life. We take all these wonderful microbes and then dump them in a load of water and expect them all. We've got many aerobic bacteria dumped in water. We need to do a lot more than just actually expect them to survive. Because I'm sure if they took a load of humans and chucked us into a river and poured us onto a different planet and wondered why we all died, I think that probably be, we're smiling, but it's true, isn't it? We treat them with such disrespect after we spent all this time making them. I think the water concept is the key to getting this right.
I'm also interested. Do you try to incorporate exclusion zone water into your own health? Do you try to make your own drinking water easy water also?
Not currently. I'm on a kefir water diet at the in terms of increasing gut health at the moment. Haven't started it. The biggest worry for me is how you make easy water that doesn't go through a reverse osmosis and therefore actually remove all of my water from my body, which could become quite dangerous. So it's actually cleaning water enough. A lot of the water we actually receive is quite hard because it contains so many chloride ions and various other things. It's trying to get it clean enough to do things with easy. But no, I haven't done it anything at the moment with easy water and human health.
Perfect. I am really interested in what you said about compost tea. So on the farm scale, you're doing 540 acres. And so you would like to apply microbes to that. And one of the best ways to do that is through compost tea. That would be the most economical way for farmers. But if you had the option, do you think it would be better to actually spread compost over the entire surface? Do you think the compost tea has other benefits, beyond just spreading compost?
I do both. Of course. It's really interesting in actual fact, and I have a few issues with outwintering cattle in blizzards and rain and everything that I see that people become very evangelical about, really, about animals are not shouldn't be in barns. All I'll say on that front is, if you have a barn in the middle of a field and it's pouring with rain, all those animals rush to the barn, like we would. So when they're in a barn, why not actually make the huge benefit of the very byproduct? If you're bedding them down on straw and they're obviously producing urine and feces, why not actually take that and make some bokashi compost and bokashi all of the very thing that's being created, and actually end up with a wonderful substance that is carbon stable, that is absolutely phenomenal at applying to your soils, and therefore, in actual fact, it is hugely increasing your organic matter and your soil health without burning away energy in forms of heat and CO2 in the amount of waste that happens when most people pile up manure piles that are also gassing off huge amounts of ammonia. So that's that for me. I've got no problem with the housing of animals. It also depends what you feed them. We don't feed ours a huge amount of grain. Ours are on hay that's made in the summer and that sort of thing. But going back to the compost teas, is I'm addicted to them because every time I do a trial of not doing it, or the machine breaks halfway through a field or something, I've taken photographs from a hill looking down, and you can see really interesting. We've got a really cold snap at the moment here in the UK. Did I say 13 degrees Fahrenheit for you guys? Which is, for us, -10 in the UK, -10 degrees Celsius in the UK is bitter, is cold. I'm just looking out of the window now, and we did a huge compost tea trial planted in a barley crop where we put, and this goes back to the question you asked me right at the start: can you apply too much biology? Can you have too much? Well, we put 10 times the rate of compost tea on that we'd normally use, and the only piece of ground that isn't covered in a hard frost is that very bit that's had 10 times the amount of biology, because they are creating a small amount of heat. Every bit of that biology, they're creating just enough, and it's to a line. I can see it out of the window.
Wow, that's actually fascinating.
Yeah. So I firmly believe that and our potato responses to compost tea has just been out of this world. I've never seen anything like it in terms of nematode control of potato cyst nematode, of rhizoctonia disappearing, of blackleg, and all sorts of things, and then scab. That we suffer with powdery scab as a skin disease disappearing as well because of this competitive exclusion. Wow. If we go and dump a potato into a vacuum, funny enough, the things that colonize that vacuum in the soil are the very diseases that we were trying to prevent in the first place. So that's it's competitive exclusion is where it's at, and for me, the more we do, the better it gets.
Do you have a favorite microbe?
Do I have a favorite microbe? No, I because I don't know enough about them, and nor does anybody else. My favorite microbe is one that lives.
I like that.
Well, on a serious note, we had this amazing project going on in the UK called the Ferra Big Soil Project, and it's been really interesting, where they've literally tried to narrow down the soil biology, and they came to our farm and they took a sample, and the bacteria in our soil that made up 70% of our soil has not even been given a name yet.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're going to ask me my favorite microbe, it'd be a tardigrade, purely because they just look awesome down through a microscope. But and aren't they awesome? But not through function, you know. And I think it's a worrying thing when these bugs in jugs that people buy and they contain 3 bacterias, and you just think, are you waging war in your soil here? What are you doing? You know, I'm so keen on making indigenous microorganisms. You know, you take your products off your farm, you compost them in your farm environment, and that includes, and this is a really important thing for making compost here for me and microbes, don't go and put them in a barn that's heated and warm, or a greenhouse or something like that. Because what happens when you take those microbes and you stick them in your environment and then you get a frost? Haven't been bred to survive. Do what you know, even if it takes longer to produce, you know, Johnson Sue, for instance, if you freeze 6 months of the year, let it freeze for 6 months. You will end up with your indigenous microorganisms that can survive the 6-month freeze. If you go and put them in a heated greenhouse, funny enough, the very things you end up with are not resilient when it freezes, and they're not indigenous.
So it's kind of like when you're doing like growing indoors, and like you have your little seedlings growing. You either want like some air resistance, and then you want to take them outside and get them more hardy, so they can like be tough to the environment. Whereas like if you didn't do that and you just let them grow indoors, they'll be like really way too flimsy and weak. And if you tried planting them outside when they were somewhat mature, they would just die because they just didn't have that external factor to kind of push their limits to be hardy.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. And I think one of the biggest things for biology, from my point of view, is on a farm scale, is when they take these plants out of the glass house and then transplant them outdoors, and yet do nothing to the biology in which they're growing in. And I think that there should be a far more important transitional phase of making sure these plants, you know, wonder why they suffer so badly and they need like 4, 5, 6 inches of water to try and get them going. In actual fact, this water is mimicking the very, is trying to cover the fact that actually the biggest problem is there's just no associations going on.
So how I ended up finding you, or hearing about you, is I am trying in the process of creating a Johnson Sue bioreactor, and I saw yours on your website, and yours looked amazing. So I have to ask you, what is your advice to me, who's trying to make a Johnson Sue bioreactor at a much smaller scale? But what are the steps I can take to be successful?
Okay, really simple. A couple of things. Number one, Dr. David Johnson cut holes in his tubes. Okay, he didn't cut holes in his tubes; it was the tubes he had. Okay, and I see everybody cutting holes in these tubes. Bearing in mind, these tubes are going to stay in your compost for about 36 hours, and then you remove them. Don't spend hours cutting holes in tubes. They are literally. People follow recipes. This is the problem. These tubes are what he could lay his hands on in that moment in time. And yet I see people sending me photographs and emails saying, I spent 4 hours cutting all these holes in these tubes. And I'm like, oh dear, you really didn't need to. Because you do know they're only going to, you know, be in there 72 hours and you pull them out and then it's all good. And it's, oh dear. Anyway, so that be one of the first ones. So
no holes.
Yeah, no holes in the tubes. If they come with holes, fine. If they don't, then don't. You know, we use wooden posts. We use everything. You know, to create the airflow. You can use anything as long as it's benign. A couple of things. Number one is all of the products that go into the Johnson Sue should be indigenous to your farm. You know, get it as local as possible. Number two, diversity. You should put in everything you possibly can, and over your shoulder it looks like, is it a cover crop and all that sort of thing. Go and mow off some cover crop. Yeah. You know, put so much diversity into it. The more diversity you get put in it, funny enough, the more diversity that comes out of it. You go and make it with just leaf or wood chip and things like that. It's good, but it won't have the diversity that if you have as many plant species as you possibly can. And that, you know, add a bit of cardboard, you know, but brown cardboard. Funny enough, nematodes absolutely love the glue that holds the cardboard together. So it's a great food as well. Number two is or number three is shred everything as much as you possibly can. Surface area is really important, and therefore, if you can shred everything, it's great. Number four is water when you make it. Absolutely saturate the stuff. In order to get the whole thing heating up and doing well, what I notice is so many people tell me that they didn't get any thermophilic phase, and it's generally because it didn't go in saturated. So that's the other thing. Get a nice mixture of green and brown, some high nitrogens and that sort of things. So, and that's the other thing. And then once you go through the thermophilic stage, after about 2 or 3 weeks, the adding of worms. And whilst compost worms, definitely add a good couple of handfuls of compost worms. Dig a load of your own, that are full of their own, your indigenous microorganisms. If you can get the more of your own you can add, the better. So they would be my 5 key points on building a Johnson Sioux. We've got hundreds here in the UK now. I've got one large farm. They built 85 Johnson Sioux. So
Wow.
yeah, and they look they look magical. So
can you make one awesome. Too big or too small?
So we went all out and made a huge one in a trailer, and that's been fantastic and worked absolutely fine. You just need to, as long as you don't have a surface area more than 1 foot away from, there's no compost more than a foot away from a hole, you'll be fine. It's a very simple ratio. Air can penetrate about 30 centimeters, 12 inches. That's where it's at. So in actual fact, that's not a problem. I don't think you can build one too small. Your biggest problem with too small is creating enough energy to get the thermophilic. So I'm a big fan of using an IBC container. Take the plastic container out, you end up with that. Do you call them IBCs with you guys in the States? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, IBC. Take the plastic out, you end up with that wonderful metal cage, which is 1 meter cube. 3 foot.
You're good.
I knew I was going to slip up. 3 foot cube. This is 3 foot cube. Yeah, roughly. Yeah, that is a wonderful. Line it with some mesh or some gardener mesh or chicken wire, if that's what you call it there. And that's fantastic. And what I also find with the IBC containers is the metal. If they come on a metal pallet, you can actually put a cross in the bottom of them and hit them up from the bottom, and they end up with 4 triangles that, funny enough, hold the pipe perfectly. So when you fill it, they're not all moving around. Wow. So they work perfectly well.
So we're going to start a little segment where I'm going to show RegenBen some pictures of farms. Hopefully it'll be entertaining. And Ben, I just want your thoughts of like your first impression of like, all right, is this a good farm? Like what are you thinking here? So I got this picture right here. This looks like a typical farm, kind of with your tractor. Looks like it might be actually. I'm not even going to say anything because I don't want to influence your words. But what are your first thoughts of this image?
Okay, yeah, moron.
That's what I thought it was going to be. Yeah. Why do you say that?
Well, it's a monoculture of whatever it might be. Huge amounts of soil disturbance to create the ridges, and then obviously spraying it with something to because nature is fighting the very fact it's a monoculture, so fighting biology with chemistry. Yeah, just sad.
And I see like back there too, just like kind of
bare soil. Yeah, no, nothing to actually attract beneficials, or it's the way of the world, unfortunately, in a lot of places.
All right, very good, very good. Now I will find picture number 2. Oh, we'll do this one.
Hard work. So This is much better. This looks like an organic farm, if I'm absolutely honest, because it looks like whatever are they watermelons or something growing under fleece, or the fleece to keep weeds at bay, and then they've nicely got some a bit of cover going up between the rows. Lacking in diversity because it all looks very similar, but it has got some diversity. Nice to see people in the field. I'm a big fan of actually people on farms. I think we've lost touch with soil, and I do think the Amish community talk about that in some phenomenal detail. But yeah, it's fine. It's a big field of whatever the crop is, but it's a massive step in the right direction.
I think they might be growing yellow squash there. I think I can
Okay.
see
It looks
one
like it would be squash,
on the
right?
ground on the
Yeah,
top
yeah.
right. I think
Yeah.
there's one sitting on the ground there.
Oh, right there?
Right there, yeah, there it is, right there.
Yeah.
It might be.
Looks like it could be. Awesome. Now what about this?
Oh dear. Do I need to say any more than oh dear? I mean,
Nope, we will move on. This is a garden. I thought I'd throw
Yeah,
this in the
nice.
mix.
I mean, I'm looking. It looks like it's. I mean, personally, yeah, I'd have had a straw mulch to prevent a lot of evaporation off the soil surface. On that scale, then armor being the most significant thing. I like the bit of diversity. You've got some flowers, some marigolds there that are attracting in your beneficials and that sort of thing. It's just a case of if you could put a compost mulch, a wood chip or straw or anything on that soil surface, prevent evapotranspiration, prevent the heat from burning up the soil microbes, is massively important. So that'd be my observation there.
Great. I definitely agree. I do. Yeah, I like how there was multiple plants. Looks like probably peppers.
Yeah.
So you like using straw as mulch? Is that your favorite? Is that your go-to?
My favorite mulch is bokashi.
Okay.
Compost.
Yeah.
Yeah, every time. Because the trouble is, if you use straw, it's got a carbon nitrogen ratio of 80-1, which means you're going to be pinching an awful lot of nitrogen off that crop to break it down. So in actual fact, if you can get a bokashi at 24-1, it has no impact on the growth of the plants at all, and therefore, in actual fact, not only are you armoring the soil, but you're totally and utterly allowing everything to work as it's designed to work and work well.
Well said. I'm definitely going to be taking advice from that because I find straw is my favorite thing to use. So I got to add a little bit more bokashi around my garden and tell the farms I help with that too.
Yeah, try and balance it a little bit, carbon nitrogens.
Ben, can I do a follow-up on that also?
Yeah, of course.
If you are adding a really high carbon material like straw, what are your thoughts on using something like calcium nitrate to add the greens there?
If you have to.
Better use plant matter?
Yeah, I mean the trouble with using calcium nitrate or any nitrate, nitrate is fairly horrific for the soil and even more horrific for plants. Nitrate requires 4 times the amount of water to actually convert to nitrogen in a plant, and is fairly inefficient at doing that. It's also a plant pollutant, and the pollution solution to pollution is dilution. So the plant starts growing rather quite rapidly to get away from the poison that is nitrate. And it grows so rapidly, unfortunately, it produces very poor cells and cell wall structures, which it allows it very open for disease and pest attack. So it's not a great thing. If you do need to use an artificial, then urea would be a better, and I appreciate you've got temperature issues and volatilization. All of them are fairly awful, because all you're basically doing is taking a nitrogen, you're mixing it with your carbon, And the only reason you're doing that is to literally gas it back into the atmosphere as fast as you possibly can in CO2. That's not really what we should be trying to achieve. Stability is far better.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, don't worry about the last one. That was we don't need to talk about that. But
the last one is my kids used to play that game. What's it called?
Minecraft.
Minecraft. That's it. Yeah, Stompy Longnose or something. My kids used to spend that as they used to watch YouTube with this bloke making this stuff.
This looks like a little bit diversity here, though. You know,
yeah, it's diversity, but there's better soil. Pretty awesome.
So
it's amazing what people have got time to do. You know, whoever created that, why don't they come to my farm and actually come and do a couple of weeks, of real, getting your hands dirty and doing exactly that, but doing it in real life. It's tragic that we're having to do it on computer generation, isn't it? This is looking good. This looks good. There's a nice mulch down. It looks like a wood chip mulch. I'm not a big fan of black plastic, single use, if I'm absolutely honest. I know it's a really tricky one with in terms of organics and that sort of thing, but it does get mightily hot under that black, and unfortunately so if that was mine, that wood chip wouldn't just be between the rows, it'd be over the top of the plastic as well. Because in actual fact, if you want those microbes to start working and giving your plants stuff, the last thing you want to do is get it to 130 degrees Fahrenheit under there and kill them all off.
And what is it? I think about 120 degrees is when most microbes are kind of killed off.
Yeah, and it'd be hotter than that under that black plastic, I'm sure.
Yeah, so to give some context about this, because it's also in my background, this is Rancocas Creek Farm, so they are a regenerative farm that I help with, and I'm very glad that you said that it was looking good, and I love the advice that you gave about the black tarp. I'm gonna send that over to the farmer his way and see what his thoughts are about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is a great farm.
Yeah, they look good.
All right. Let's see. What do you think about this compost pile?
I mean, it's steam, but it could be CO2, couldn't it? That's why I'm a big fan of Bokashi. I really am. I totally get I find it incredibly hard to create very good biological compost by turning. Keeping the moisture right, keeping the turning right, keeping the oxygen right, keeping the temperature right, keeping it all doing what it should be doing. I find it very, very hard. I've done the Elaine Ingham course, and I get how important it is as well. But I think most people that are doing it without a huge amount of science are probably creating a fairly poor biological compost. Because believe you me, I've tried 15, 20 times. Probably made one decent compost out of those 20. That I looked through a microscope and thought, yeah, this is awesome stuff. And the other problem I've got is you start with a huge pile of carbon, and as it breaks down and disappears, it's your carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere. There's a lot of waste. There's a lot of waste associated with it, and of course the heat. You get 60, 70 degrees centigrade, so 100 degrees Fahrenheit plus, isn't it? 140 degrees Fahrenheit. That's energy being lost in heat creation, which means you're losing things again. So for me, I quite like the fact of clamping the stuff down, putting effective microbes and doing that. But the fact he's creating compost and not using straw or just putting plain straw down is good. It's a good effort.
Awesome. And then got this.
Yeah, I recognise that.
Yeah, where could that be from?
Yeah, that's my Chaos Garden.
Can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, I mean, we just have a bit of fun on at home, and what we decided to do was just literally mix all our seeds together of veg and salads and things, sprinkle them over a bit of an area here. And grow grow what, and actually it's a bit like a Garden of Eden, essentially. Pick what's ripe and pick what's ready at whatever time of the year. This was getting towards the back end of the year. As you can see, the pumpkins were getting rather prolific. I think it's, yeah, end of September. I think this is probably mid-end of September. Some of the brassicas have gone to head by then and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's something I just think everybody should have a bit of fun playing at. Is a chaos garden, you know, on however small a scale and that sort of thing, and you know, we just need as humans to start embracing the chaos of nature. You know, our obsession with lawns with lines up and down and not a weed anywhere, and I mean, we're the only animal on planet Earth that is obsessed with neat, tidy, and absolute uniformity. I don't know what's wrong with us, and I don't know how it's been bred into us. But to me, we should start looking at that picture in the foreground and think that's beautiful, and the grass behind it in the background, which was mowed ready for a wedding in actual fact, is something that's fairly ugly. That's something we really need to change as mindsets.
That's wonderfully said. I actually, because it's a really interesting thing, because you do see that, and culturally, from my perspective, like without knowing what I know now about how important it is to have like pretty much that ground not showing, I would be like, oh wow, that's so messy. Like, why don't you cut that off and like you said, make those lines and stuff. But in actuality, like that's perfect. Like you don't have the soil showing. You have roots in the ground. Your plants are growing amazingly, as you can tell by this massive pumpkin. You have your cover crops. You have wildfires just all over the place, and it is chaotic, but in such a beautiful way. And I think that is something that you make a good point about.
And it's absolutely humming with insects as well. Absolutely humming. You know, there's a space for us all.
All right, well, that's pretty much all the images I got. I thought it would just be a little entertaining to pull up one of your farm, though, and see how you reacted. So it's a good thing you recognized it, you know.
Yeah.
Do you have those images that you were going to show us?
I do. So, am I able to share my screen? Yes, I am. Are you able to see that?
Yes.
So, yeah, so what we basically do, I'll go back to you can see the metal cage, and then we flip it upside down, and we put a cross and then punch those through, so that essentially when you put the pipe work in, they are held at the bottom. That's something we have a real problem with, or did have a problem with, is as you start filling them, they move and all that sort of thing. That works perfectly well. And then that's what we put in ours, some pig muck, some chicken muck, some bean, wheat, linseed, clover hay, fresh maize, and we also put some wood chip as well.
Wow.
Chipped it all up, as you can see, put it through this great big chipper. We had a sprinkler system on it all day long, and it was pouring with rain. Mixed it all up with the telehandler, and then filled it all up. Left the tubes in for 72 hours. Took the tubes out, as you can see, perfectly formed. The steam rising, water in it, and on we go as it starts to weather down and down and down. And then our extraction method.
So what is that exactly? All that water, like you said, the extraction method.
Yeah, so we use a airlift vortex. I'm not sure. Do you use those in the US? I think you do. Essentially, can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Yeah. So here's an air pump at the back of on the floor here. Yeah, there's an air pump, and that basically pumps air down these tubes that are also full of water, and they come to about here. And what happens is you can see the water level is filled to about there, and the water is expelled up there. And as you turn the air on, it lifts the water up these pipes high enough to throw it out of the side of the pipe. and then it creates this vortex of which we then drop the tea bag in and extract it. So what you haven't got is a macerating pump that keeps smashing all your biology to pieces. And that's really quite important. That the last thing you want to do, you spent 400 days creating this wonderful Johnson Sue microbial mass. The last thing you want to do is then go and stick it through a pump that smashes it to pieces. So it's a very kind way. And then we put fish hydrolysate, molasses, and the Johnson Sue in. So we put a food package with it.
Yeah. I think it's important to note for people out there listening that using the air as opposed to a pump, I feel like stirring up the microbes is super important because microbes settle fairly quickly. And Rob can talk about this because Rob does some microscope work, and it's very important for him to take the samples out of his test tube quickly so that he can actually get a good sample of those microbes from the surface of the water whenever it's just been shaken up. But yeah, so these units are sold to American gardeners, I think, in just like a 5-gallon bucket size. They have like a little air pump, and there's like generally just like a stand of PVC pipe. And just like you said, it kind of shoots the air in the bottom, and the air brings the water up with it, and it just keeps churning it back and forth. So whenever people do apply compost tea, it's definitely important to have it mixed up properly like that, consistently. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, Ben. It seems like you have a good handle on your own mind. I feel like you have a really good standpoint for mental health, for generating happiness in your own life. And it seems like regenerative agriculture was kind of an outlet for you to kind of, live a better life. I was wondering if you have any general kind of tips for everybody to start living a happier life. Is there some kind of knowledge that you've learned along the way that can help the rest of us?
To be fair, Nicole Masters sums it up really well with Aikigi. Are you familiar with that term, the Japanese terminology of Aikigi?
No, I've never heard of it.
Okay. So Aikigi is here. It's basically your Aikigi is what you love, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, what you're good at, and then your passion, your mission, your vocation, your profession. And funny enough, if you've got things good, then you're in this wonderful life. And I'll be honest, I'm here. I have found my Aikigi. I love it. The world needs it. I can be paid for it, and I'm good at it. And it mixes all those sort of things, and I think that is one of the biggest things for me. And like I said, Nicole Masters introduced me to that phrase, and that's where I think everybody should be really focusing their lives towards. So hopefully that's kind of
find that inner Aikigi.
Yeah, and I think it's good. And what's good about it is like you say, the secret being is if you can start doing what the world needs. Funny enough, that's what gives you a lot of inner pleasure, because actually, if you can farm in a way that actually people are really appreciative of the way you farm and that sort of thing, and then you fall in love with the way you farm, and then you realize you're getting paid for that stuff, and then you realize in actual fact, because of your knowledge and what you're gaining, you're rather quite good at it. Wow, it's phenomenal. What the world doesn't need is lots and lots of nutrient-free or missing nutrients in poor food. And yeah, most people generally don't actually love what they're doing.
Unfortunately.
So,
yeah, excellent advice. Thank you.
So actually, something that's interesting, because I think just in general, though, you being outside in nature and farming and, like you said, doing what the world needs, but also just being out in like your natural environment, I think is also extremely beneficial to your mental health and like how you even perceive the world. So there's actually a paper. It talks about how microbes might have the potential to boost your mood. So certain, I guess, chemicals that they release can be absorbed in your body for extremely simple terms, and your mood is then thusly increased, and you receive more serotonin just from being outside and interacting with these microbes that do that. And funnily enough, too, they say that your dog could be transferring over those microbes to you too, which is why you might also really like your dog. So, um, but yeah, just being out in nature, I think helps make you really happy as well.
I don't think it's just your dog as well. If your farm animals are happy animals, I think you get a lot out of those. I mean, I was talking to my wife Helen the other night about the fact that we went 25 years without an animal on the farm, and now we have huge amounts of animals, and it feels like we've put the soul back into the farm. Because there's a reason for getting up every morning, going outside and tending to the animals and doing exactly what you need to do, and the response they give back to you, and you can't help but smile when you go and look at your cattle, your sheep, your goats, and everything, and if you're not getting the pleasure out of that, then you're not doing it very well, or you're not doing it right, or you're doing it for all the wrong reasons.
Do you ever get hesitant about working with these animals after like the tragedy with your son?
No. No, I think my mum said you're always given the crosses you can bear. You're always dealt the crosses you can bear. And there's one thing I think is probably the most important thing, and I haven't spoken much about Job in this podcast, my son. Job doesn't walk very well. Is obviously got quite a severe brain damage and that sort of thing. Job is also my anchor. I'm very busy. I work 3 a.m. start most mornings, and if I finish at 10 p.m. that's early. I love it. I don't complain, and I do that 7 days a week and thoroughly enjoy my life. And it's not all just work, but you know what I mean. It's just busy.
Right.
And then I have times where I have Job. And for me to walk with Job across our farmyard might take me an hour and a half, and he'll stop and pick up sticks and say, "Daddy, look at this stick, isn't it beautiful?" And you have to stop and look at this stick because he has found something beautiful in it, and therefore, in actual fact, look at the form, look at the shape, and it really just does everything the opposite of what my life is. And I think it's an essential part of my life that actually the whole slowing down, the whole appreciation of just sitting on the riverbank, throwing pebbles into the river, and admiring the beautiful splashes and that sort of thing, and all the things he loves is so important as a grounding for me. So for me, it was a massive blessing, that accident. It's affected Job, but one thing about Job, and that everybody always observes, he's one of the happiest boys you'll ever see. Because at the end of the day, because he hasn't got the responsibility of worry, because he isn't, unfortunately, capable of having that. But what an amazing life. He hasn't got to worry about money. He hasn't got to worry about food because he gets fed 3 times a day. He hasn't got to worry about heat and where that's coming from. And I just look at him sometimes and think, what a wonderful world, simple world you live in. And that's why I keep talking about those three things. Farming's simple. It should be simple, and Job is something that is so simple in so much as, have I got, is my belly full of food? Am I warm? Why am I not happy then? And I think we just need to look at happiness in such a simple way. And that's what I say, I go out on my farm and I look at it and just think, wow, how lucky am I? You know, it's just amazing. So yeah.
I love your attitude, Ben. It's so positive, and it's just like it's truly inspiring. Um, just like the adversity that you went through, and like you're coming out with this mentality. I mean, and I'm sure Job is happy too because he probably has. I mean, you're just probably a wonderful dad, so like I'm sure it works both ways for him. But wow. Uh, so I
Yeah.
guess like, oh, go ahead.
No. I wouldn't say anything. It's just, I just think we all look for too much complexity. We make life impossible for ourselves, and just need to just do the basic things well. Go right back to basics and do it well. Whether it be farming, whether it be in life, whether it be a family, just do the things that just you know, eat, drink, be, sleep, be merry, kind of thing. Because for tomorrow, you never know.
Mm. So running with this, I'm gonna. This might sound a little down, but I kind of took inspiration. I'm not sure if you know who Lex Friedman is, but for those of you who do, I found this question to be a very Lex Friedman podcast. I'm gonna try to do my best to channel it when I ask it. Do you think, Ben, we are too late in the regenerative timeline of reversing like all the damage done to our soil?
No, no, and the reason I don't is thankfully Mother Nature is the most wonderful healer.
Hmm.
You give her an opportunity, she responds amazingly, yeah, amazingly well. And what we've seen, and there's plenty of studies now backing up that University of Sheffield here in the UK managed to restore a soil to 70% of its potential within 3 years.
Hmm.
So for me, I think if we give nature a chance to restore, she fills the vacuum rather quite quickly. At the end of the day, you know how much bacteria she's ramming in your soil every single day. If only we let her just get to trophic number 2, that would be a start, wouldn't it? Before we worry about trophics 3, 4, and 5. So I just think hyperinflation of inputs. And the beautiful thing, I haven't mentioned this, but I don't actually consider biology a science. So that's going to go down in history, isn't it? I believe chemistry, physics, and math are science, and I believe biology is an art.
Hmm.
And the sooner we move away from this scientific approach to farming, the better. And the reason I don't believe biology to be a science is our sciences should be are generally binary. You know, if you do X plus Y, you end up with Z, and you do that experiment 100,000 times, and it's exactly the same response. Biology, of course, we have mutation, we have all those beautiful things that happen within biology, and it's so non-binary that in actual fact it's very hard to replicate anything. And therefore, when we're chasing this science continuously, unfortunately, when people say citation and I need you to verify these results across 4 replicated plots, well, I guarantee the plots in the first place aren't replicated because soil biology just changes so much everywhere and everything. So so for me, that's a real problem. We need to get away from biology. I'm actually spending a huge amount of time at the farm at the moment at home, creating art installations. We have a huge mural painted about our regenerative journey. Don't know
Hmm.
whether you guys would be interested in seeing that. Um, and we're putting in sculptures and things because I personally feel that farming is an art, not a science. If you spent more time listening to your gut feeling, you'd be a better farmer. And therefore, for me, I think it's and I probably haven't even answered the question yet again of what you asked, but anyway.
No, you did. And yeah, if you want to pull up those images, if you have them, that would be great. I mean, more content, the better. So that's the
Can you
mural?
see our
Yes.
that's our barn door? So this in the centre of where we were,
Wow.
with lots of erosion and rooks and sheep and dead trees and a poor river health, tractors burning away carbon, and this is where we are. You know, diversity, lots of things, a healthier river, animals, alley cropping, lots of roots, and yeah, it's pretty cool.
I see you have everything
It
tied in there. You have the vineyard, you have the pigs, the cover
yeah.
crops, your
The
vegetables,
fl- the flood.
the
I
flood.
haven't. The flood. We haven't talked about our flood, have I?
I don't think so. No.
So okay, so interesting enough, we talked about my animals. I've got cattle, sheep, pigs, and goats and that sort of thing. And for 90% of the year, they run all together in a flood, a flock and a herd. So, so we have one great big mob of multiple species. Why wouldn't you? Um,
Flood.
so yeah, the cows, the sheep, the goats, the alpacas, and the pigs are all in together.
And you call it the flood?
The flood, yeah, the
That's a
flock and the herd.
great word. I love that. Flood.
I think my favorite part about this mural is the fact that the picture starts below ground,
Mm.
and I'm seeing earthworms in there. I see some mushrooms over there inside.
Yeah.
I think I could see mycorrhizae in there too. Mycorrhizae.
Of
Yeah.
course, I got the artist to spray. So this is all done with spray can graffiti style. So
Wow.
there's no paint, there's no brush, and yeah, he put mycorrhizae. I got him to spray a very. You can see the very white sort of misty across the roots just to show some mycorrhizal associations. Yeah, but he was very good. He looked at you can see the daikon radish. He got the right leaves for the right roots as well. And yeah, I was thrilled with what he created for us. Um, and we're huge for us. Public engagement is so important. We need to explain to the public what we're doing, how we're farming, why we're farming in the way we're doing, and what and own up to some of the problems in the past, and what we're doing to put those right.
So it keeps ringing in my head of your statement, or of the best advice that, or one of the advice that you would give farmers is to disregard a lot of the advice that they get. Um, and I'm just curious, where do you think that disconnect happened? Where there was like the forefront community who's pushing the like this agenda, um, and like how like where did that separation happen?
Again, it's the frog analogy in the boiling water, isn't it? It didn't just happen on day one. It happened, there are always advisors, and that's not a bad thing. But you've also got the legal entity of somebody. If you want to use an agrochemical, then you need somebody that's qualified to sell you that piece of agrochemical, of which he comes with some advice, generally to use it. No different in medicine and no different in veterinary either. So it becomes a real problem that when you used to ring up, probably in the past, and ask for somebody to, I've got, say, a weed, can I have some spray? He'd come and look and say, yeah, no problem, and bring the spray with him probably. That soon became the chap then saying, well, rather than you go and look, and why don't you pay me to go and look, and then in actual fact, then I'll bring, sort the spray out, and then before you know it, these guys are pretty much, well, you need to spray this. And the disconnect of the farmer and the farm itself is fairly horrific. The amount of farms I turn up on and say, grab your spade, and I do that on purpose, and most people can't even find one.
Hmm.
So, well, that's the thing you own. Let's go and focus on the thing you own.
So I know you're a huge reader as well, um, and I'm curious because so for context, I got a library of books about uh, growing plants and just pretty much a lot of related. So it came from a master gardener uh, who unfortunately passed away, but I took that legacy of all of his knowledge. But I find a lot of these books are from like the 1980s and before. I'm still reading them, and I still find a lot of useful information, even though some of it doesn't necessarily line up with how we might think of it today or like some current research. I find a lot of it never really changed. What are your thoughts about that? Of like older knowledge transcending to today?
Yeah, so funny enough, I've read 700 odd books, and it became an absolute addiction. But it needed to be to actually understand what I was doing. That was the fundamental thing, and taking and wrestling back control really of as I said, I was an agronomist, so I had to almost retrain myself in a totally different direction. So that was massively important to read. What I did find out is, fortunately, the UK wrote some amazing books back in the 1890s, way before all of this stuff was invented. And their solutions to most of the problems is where I've taken an awful lot of information from. Nothing we are doing right now is new. Some of the understanding might be a little bit new. They knew it worked. They probably didn't quite understand why it worked or how it worked, but they knew it worked. So in actual fact, for me, you're absolutely right. There's nothing particularly new. I mean, the solutions to most of the problems were discovered a long time ago. I'll say the Egyptians, the Romans, all of these guys, the Mayans, and these guys were doing some amazing stuff. And then, if you believe The Erosion of Civilization by David Montgomery, unfortunately then farmed the soils to death to the point where, in actual fact, the civilizations disappeared. But they still had a huge amount of knowledge of what to use and how to use things. But certainly in the 1890s, the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food books, I've taken a huge amount of knowledge from there. So, yeah, nothing new. Nothing.
Do you have any current books you're reading right now that you would like to recommend?
I'm reading a book called Hedgehog at the moment. What happens a lot, I think, is you read all the regenerative books and then you kind of go off on tangents.
Yeah.
At the moment, we're actually creating a sculpture out of scrap metal based on hedgehogs. Do you have hedgehogs in the US?
Yes.
Yeah. So hedgehogs, my hometown was known for 1,500 years as the home of the hedgehog. It apparently was crawling and heaving with them, and it was named both in Celtic times and later in Saxon times as hedgehog by direct translation. They're such a rarity these days that they pretty much, we see them very, very rare. So I'm a big advocate of putting the hedgehogs back. So I'm reading all about hedgehogs and obviously hedgehogs live in hedges, hence the reason hedgehog. What's gone wrong with our hedgerows and our hedge systems, and the fact they live on beetles and they live on earthworms and they live on caterpillars and that sort of thing, and the overuse of insecticides in the past has obviously left a huge decline, and therefore we're doing a pretty cool scrap metal sculpture, and this mummy hedgehog pulling a big cart with baby hedgehogs in the back, and they've all got little banners and they're holding up little protest boards. And one of them's like insecticide is hog genocide, and we're not pointless, and little banners like that. So it's pretty bit of fun. Again, it's for the community to come and have a look at and bring kids up and stuff like that. And a bit of a serious note, but a bit of fun, a bit of education. So so the book I'm reading at the moment is a book called Hedgehog. So it probably doesn't have a huge importance on this. And the next book I'm reading is on creating a roundhouse. We've got a crop circle where there was an Iron Age roundhouse built on the farm, and we were going to have a go at recreating one.
What is a roundhouse?
To make it a roundhouse is like I said, an Iron Age house. It's pretty much what it says. It's round. It's made of obviously huge tree trunks that go up, and then they fold over themselves in the roof. It's quite an interesting roof. Then you have a thatched roof, and it's where the Iron Age used to live. So we're going to next to the actual crop circle we have. We're actually going to recreate one. And make it in, and it happens to be by the Vineyard, and we thought we'd make it into a bit of a tasting where you can come and taste some wine and some cheese and that sort of thing. So it'll be pretty functional as well.
Sounds so good, actually.
Oh, it's great, isn't it? And I'm smiling thinking about it. And why wouldn't you just love that of working with timber off your own farm, and building something and leaving a legacy for my children or grandchildren that, I remember Dad going mad and building this roundhouse, and it's just going to be cool as anything. And yeah, it's brilliant.
So kind of going off of that, I read a book called The Long Now. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's about a project conceptually started back in the 70s or 80s, I believe. But really, the project is to bring the perspective of thinking long term. So the long now meaning, so like one of the projects that they were going to build to get that conceptually across was like some big massive clock in the desert that you can walk inside, and like every clock ticks like every like tick is like per 10 decades, and like it'll go around in like a millennia or something like that. But just like the basic idea is just like thinking ahead, and trying to get in that mindset of making these projects that have everlasting effects for the future generations. And I find a lot of that to be like true in gardening. I think or in farming, I think if you're going to be a farmer, it's almost like crucial if you're going to leave a legacy behind to think in that perspective. And it sounds like that's something that you're already there at.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, interesting enough, I consult on some of the largest estates in the UK. And you can imagine some of the estates like Blenheim Palace and various things. They're on the 24th Earl of Marlborough. And all these earls in the past have either had Capability Brown come and leave a legacy of these wonderful gardens and all these things throughout history. And I go to all of these estates and ask the earls what their legacy is going to be, because they're not going to build anymore. They're not going to do much. It certainly won't invade countries like they used to, and all the honour and that came with that. So what are they going to do? And I suggest that their legacy should be soil. And in actual fact, why don't you actually leave the legacy that is a soil that is actually far better and far greater than what you inherited? So that's starting to become quite a really good theme running through a lot of these big estates. So I think we should all be leaving a legacy of soil.
For sure. And so you know Gabe Brown. Royce and I, we both read his book Dirt to Soil. How much has Gabe Brown, like, I don't know if you read that book, like how much have you learned from him and like his practices?
Okay, yeah, I don't know him that well. I just happened to meet him back in 2015. So and go and have a look, but I'm sure he wouldn't recognise me if I fell over him now, sort of thing. So his book Dirt to Soil is amazing, and it's a great read. The biggest problem is everybody gets to the end of the book and then forgets the 4 chapters where he talks about financial ruin and the fact he didn't harvest a crop for 4 years. But that's irrelevant. That I'm going to become a regenerative farmer. That's a real problem. They all seem to get that amnesia of those middle chapters about the fact he failed and failed and failed and failed. Essentially, he grew 4 years of cover crops. So he's a great. I'm glad when everybody who gets in touch with me as a consultant says, "I've read Gabe Brown's book." I'm thinking, brilliant, but I know what's going to come next. You go out there and they've already bought a drill for £140,000, a direct drill. Their soils are nowhere near in any condition to accept one. And then you have to break the news to them that in actual fact, if you want the drill to work, then if we could possibly go through 4 years of no financial return from the farm, so 4 years of cover crop, and they look at you quite strangely, and then you open the book and show them again. that he's had 4 years of failure and say, right, we need to go this at a far steadier pace. And it's a transition and a weaning rather than a jump off a cliff. So Gabe's done a huge amount of good, but unfortunately, the human race is your mind becomes fully regenerative way before your soul gets anywhere near it. And what the biggest thing for me is people's patience, and it is dreadful because you've got to have 365 days of patience to make a step. You know, and I sit here age 46. If I want to retire at 65, I've got 19 more tries. Everybody asks why I'm so busy in September, October, because if I'm not, then I've got to wait another 365 days before I can have another go.
Wow. Yeah.
So you know, as a farmer, if you go to university, you've got 40 tries. That's all. That's not many.
Wow. But
it definitely makes sense that it would be hard to make a lot of advancements in just one lifetime, and it would take generations to really push forward and, you know, figure out the way to treat the soil. And I definitely think it's important to read many books if you're going to be a farmer, because a lot of those different techniques have been maybe not, you know, forgotten completely, but they've been overshadowed by the, you know, more on kind of. Yeah. So yeah, you really don't have that many growing seasons as a human, which is kind of sad.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is the sad thing is of humans as well is vertical integration, as I call it. You know, people only go to see their fields when they're sat in a tractor cab or a truck, the cab of their truck. Get out of it. Get out of the cab. Go and walk across the field with a spade. Go and have a look. Go and smell. You were blessed with 5 senses. They're really quite amazing, those 5 senses. You know, trying to get a robot to do any of those 5 things is taking a rather long time, isn't it? Considering when I was at primary school back in the 80s, we all thought by the year 2000 we'd be having flying cars and, you know, and robots would be doing everything. They haven't quite managed it, have they? So yeah, the human psyche, and I actually think I was thinking about this driving home the other night, and I thought our senses have developed because of agriculture, because of food production, haven't they? When you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, like that was like the whole. I mean, we use them for pretty much to eat. I mean, that's kind of what we're designed to do is like eat and reproduce, and without those senses, like we wouldn't be able to find the food and correct, I guess, nutrition to find to be able to then carry on. But yeah, so that's a really good point. So your senses are really geared for finding agricultural efficiencies.
100%.
All right. So I kind of can you talk about your wormery? I know you have a wormery, and I'm just a little curious.
I'm gonna have to get going in a little while because I've got a lot going on my farm. So my wormery is a massive design flaw. I wanted to build a continuous flow wormery. In other words, you add stuff to the top and harvest it out of the bottom. That way you haven't got to keep turning it or destroying it and that sort of thing. And I looked on YouTube and I looked on the internet and I found various designs. None of them seemed to quite work that brilliantly, and then kind of came up with my own design. And it's okay, but it's got its own flaws. I built it far too deep. I don't know why on earth. It's 5 foot deep. Of course, we've only got material in 2 foot. So we could probably go and do some adjustments to it. But essentially, it's do you have cattle grids? Yeah, you have cattle grids in the States. Yeah. So it's essentially built on a cattle grid frame. And then on below the cattle grid frame, there's a big steel bar with long bolts that go through the cattle grid on a pulley system, on a rail. So essentially, you have your compost all on this cattle grid, and then it all stays there, and you have your worms, and then every so often you turn the pulley on, and it drags the rail with the bolts that are stuck through the cattle grid, it scarifies and all of your vermicast. The biggest problem is I actually sell the vermicompost in the shop because it's a little circular economy for us. In that all the waste products from the shop or everything we sell is compostable, all the packaging and that sort of thing. So anything that comes out of the shop gets put in the wormery. The worms turn it into beautiful vermicompost. Then we harvest it, bag it up, and sell it to the very people that created the waste in the first place.
That's awesome.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And that sounds like a pretty complicated process. I mean, it sounds like it. I'm not sure how much it is on.
No, it's not that complicated. I think there's a YouTube. If you Google RegenBen YouTubes, there's a few things. The chicken tractor, and I'm sure there's a walk round of the wormery I did as well. So it's not that. It's hard without diagrams, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Ben, wonderful. Out of respect for your time, we'll wrap things up. But I just wanted to shout out real quick. I know you have a book coming out. You just want to touch on that real quick and kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I say not really. It is going to come out. The problem being is, I said to you about the £7.5 million this lawsuit that hang over me and Helen. It's still not quite sorted. We're hoping it's going to be sorted by sort of February, March, 2023, which means. If it does get sorted, hopefully because the courts have started to see sense and not sue us for £7.5 million in the interest of Joe. But I thought it was rather quite important to explain to people that did we end up in a cardboard box or did we actually end up keeping the farm? You know, it's quite a major thing. The book's called Moron. It's a combination of our story and that we touched on, about Joe, but about all the things that happened in my life. But it's also a real simple formula for people looking to escape the moron route. You know, what do I do? What's step number one? Where do I go? You know, there's so much information flying around. It's, you shouldn't do this and go and buy a direct drill and that sort of thing. Well, actually, it's all about soil. It's all about your soil. Start to get intimate with your soil. And you touched on it perfectly, Royce, just earlier about soil testing. You know, get a comprehensive soil test, not a soil test that was designed to sell fertilizer, that works on the law of the minimum. Find a soil test that will actually explain what you have been either blessed with or not blessed with, but at least you know what you have. And understand that how chemistry has a massive influence on your soil, you know, the calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium, and how that builds soil structure and that sort of thing. And the fact that if you combine chemistry and physics, you can shortcut your way to biology. If you're only using physics and ignoring the chemistry, it becomes very, very tricky. And often you end up falling off a cliff. So it's a guide to how we went about it. That also is not a blueprint, but it is also a very nice way of understanding. You know, in this whole world of information now, there's far too much, and hopefully it just brings things back down to a little bit more basics. And and takes us right through to where we are now, and our future vision of the farm, and where we hope you know our children might take it on, and that sort of thing, and who knows what. So yeah, that's pretty much what my book.
Awesome.
I'm really excited to read it.
Yeah,
for sure. And why don't you mention to people? Are you on social media? Do you have a website? How can people find you out there?
I was on social media, and I found I was spending so much time explaining myself that I kind of withdrew a fair bit. I was on Twitter, just at BenTD76, so BENTD Tango Delta 76, the year I was born. Rarely do I, but yeah, I should do some. I'm on Instagram and I'm on Facebook, but I can't remember the last time I posted on any of them. And I should, and I think I'm going to do a bit more YouTubing actually of things we're doing, because and then just ignore the comments. The biggest thing is everybody asks for everything you're doing or questions, you know, and you find either you need to be defensive or helpful, and the next thing you realize you've put 3 or 4 days worth of effort into, you know, you can soon lose time. So that becomes a bit of a problem. I have a website, www.regenben.com, which does need a little bit of updating. I wrote it November 21, so it just does need a little bit of updating of various things, but that's pretty comprehensive of what we're doing and where we're going. But mainly, just go YouTube, my name, or RegenBen or Ben Taylor Davies. I did a very nice presentation at a show we have in the UK called Groundswell. For those that are struggling with mental health and that sort of thing, and that story I explained, I go into it a bit more depth and things, and it's called Regenerate Your Mind. So you might want to look that up, and yeah, there's quite, like you say, John Kemp's done a podcast and various other people, so you can find out more. And I'm coming to Oklahoma, I think I spoke at No Till on the Plains last year, and this year I'm in Oklahoma in 27th, 28th of February, and 1st of March. I'm not even quite sure what I presume it's some no-tiller regen kind of conference, is it? I don't know.
Imagine you get there and it's just like all fertilizer companies.
Yeah, well, I know it's Jimmy Emmons has invited me there, and I know definitely that's a good thing. Yeah, I know what he's all about, so that's pretty cool. So yeah, and it's good to catch up with the guys over, you know, Rick Clark's of the US, you know, doing the organic no-till. A lot of time for Rick and what he's doing, and yeah, and Michael Thompson, and so many people doing some great stuff. So it's nice to get some inspiration and try and bring it back here and do that stuff.
That's awesome, Ben. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I still have like a trillion more questions that I want to ask you.
Let's do another one.
Let's
do another one.
100%. I mean, this will be great. I know we spent a fairly amount of time talking, and I hope people like it. For everyone else, even though Ben said that he might not like answering all the questions because he gets bogged down with them, make sure to leave a comment with what questions you have, and we'll try to answer them to the best of our ability. But besides that, Royce, do you have anything else to say?
Well, I just want to say, Ben, thank you for sharing your story with us. You are very inspirational, and I think a lot of the stuff that you're talking about can be applied not only to farming, but to life in general. And I'm hoping that this book that you're coming out with is going to be just as philosophical as the One Straw Revolution is. I have a feeling that it's going to have a lot of nice tidbits in there for just general life, too. But I really enjoyed talking to you, Ben, and thank you for your time this morning.
No problem. I mean, if you end up with a load of questions, we could do a live Q&A if you want.
That'd be amazing. There you go, people. Ask as many questions as you want.
Yeah, it's easier to do it live than it is to try and keep typing answers. So I'd be more than happy if you get big response that we do a live Q&A.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ben. Do you have anything else to shout out to the internet?
No, not at all.
All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll catch you on the next podcast, and happy growing.
Happy growing.